Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We are going to continue on with this week's theme of favorite riffs, where we check out some of y'all's favorite riffs. I mean, it's a pretty self-explanatory theme title, right? Today we're going to be looking at a group called Emperor, which we've done in the past. For some reason though, I'm thinking prog rock? Is there any prog rock bands with like Emperor in the title or something like it? I mean, King Crimson sort of has that same royalty area to it, but it's the wrong words, wrong syllables. I'm looking at this album art though, and I'm thinking black metal. I don't know. This comes off of their 1994 album In the Night Side Eclipse. Let's dive into the track. I am the Black Wizards. Wait, I singular, wizards plural. Whatever. I don't ask questions in this genre. Let's hit it. Really hammering in on that ride cymbal. Heavy use of that synth choir throughout most of this track now. There's a lot of triplets going on in here. The fast notes in the guitar work in our first verse was based on triplets. The ride cymbal right there gave us triplets. I wonder just how often we have uh, a grouping of three against a grouping of two or four in here. Everything in this back quarter pushing towards a slower, more moodier atmosphere, working a lot better for me. Oh, bringing back this riff. I was like, why do I know where this is going? So it's not the same riff, but it's the same. That is from our chorus. But instead of playing chords, we have the outline of the chords. Boom, 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 boom. We kind of showcase the root, the octave, and a couple of notes in between rather than playing the chord full out with some sort of rhythmic or textural thing going on for it. So yeah, that's actually a really cool recontextualization of an idea from earlier in the track. And the sad part is, to me, that's the standout. I'm sure that there's one of the more rule of cool riffs that was probably intentional for this, but I'm walking away from it thinking, what was the riff in here that, somebody absolutely loved? And when I presented this theme to my patrons, I never even thought to ask about what riff is the one because I kind of figured everything was going to be like yesterday's No One Knows, Queens of the Stone Age, where it's like it has the riff. You can't mistake it. That song has a riff that is unforgettable. It's very unique to that track. And that's sort of what I was expecting for all this week. Not necessarily just rock music, but where the riff is obviously a part of the song's identity. This song has so many riffs in it that one of them was the one picked for the week, but I don't know, and none of them really stood out to me personally. And like I said, comically enough, my favorite part was the end, which is kind of a riff, but is really more foundational than anything else. It's chord progression, just done in a different way than we originally had. It's just a really nice callback there. Um, there are quite a few really cool riffs in here, though. Um, we have the verse riff. The chorus moves towards more of a chord progression thing. We also had a couple during what I think is the bridge, but our bridge was like two parts, kind of. Because we'll touch on structure in a second, but I do view this in a very traditional structure. But we have the first half of the bridge, which is the driving section before we hit the halftime feel, and that gives us a couple more riffs that I think are interesting. I mean, they all fit in the rule of cool thing. They all kind of give me similar vibes, similar energy and atmosphere and emotion. There's none that really stand out to me as being distinct in here as far as that. They're all definitely metal riffs. And, I've expressed in the past that I kind of have a difficulty in telling them apart. I know some people listen to a riff and they're like, man, this riff's so cool. It gives me these vibes, and you can tell it's this guy because of this idea. And like, I don't connect with riffs that way. So it's I think that the reason this track was picked was because one of those rule of cool riffs is cool. And it's memorable to that person. But unlike yesterday, where I kind of dug in and tried to figure out why Queens of the Stone Age's riff is as iconic as it is, why it's lasted the test of time, and why people still like that song, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do that here. So, unfortunately, moving away from the theme idea, let's talk about the song more globally, more generally. There we go. Structure, which I guess is also a type of focus, not a very general conversation here. I view this very much in verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, with a small variation that in the middle of the bridge we shift to a new bridge idea. So technically, I wouldn't call it a C section. We have a C and then a D. But the final section of the song, to me, is still the chorus, but it's halftime and composed in a variation of the idea that we had in the original chorus. I would probably call it in the structure B with a little tick mark next to it to showcase that it's a variation. It is to me still still a chorus that we resolve to after the bridge. So despite having a bit of a linear middle and a completely brand new outro, it still feels like the traditional structure to me, which I think is very cool. Right? There's nothing wrong with the traditional structure. I know, especially prog bands are going to look at it and be like, "Nah, we ain't doing that. That's typical. That's, blueprint. We don't work with that." But there's honestly nothing wrong with doing it. But I think it's even cooler when you adhere to it in a unique way like this track does, where the outro is a chorus, but it's also a brand new section. So it takes all the benefits of the familiar structure while also working within something a bit more linear technically. And that's always going to work so good for me. It's just straddling that line between linear writing and cyclical writing, especially expected cycles like the ABABCB pattern. Um, and it's just, I really enjoyed that. Plus, it recontextualized some ideas from earlier in a brand new light, and it gave me a sound that I was happier with. Because honestly, this is black metal, and black metal has a sound. I will say that this is a bit higher fidelity than I would expect for 94 in black metal. It's still very crunchy though, very compressed. It feels big though, which I found interesting because all the instruments are compressed. And there is one guitar that it was the first guitar we heard, and I thought that was going to be the volume of the song. I was like, dang, this is going to be a small track. Then there's a second guitar that came in and just filled this space. It sounded massive in comparison. And I think having the two guitars at two different sizes like that gives the song a bit of unique quality to it, a characteristic that sets it apart. Very rarely do I hear black metal with varying sizing like this, or even just varying volume levels. Usually, the bass is going to be the only thing that's different, and that's because you sometimes can't hear it, which I don't remember hearing much bass in this one either. Um, but yeah, usually your two guitars are going to be pretty much identical in tone, texture, size, volume. They're just going to be pushed out to the sides. The only difference is usually what they play. So they usually play single note stuff. We create dyads because they're playing different notes, gives us these nice harmonies. This is like very typical blueprint cookie cutter black metal I'm describing here. And then the drums are usually going to be about the same volume, maybe a little louder, and the vocals are going to be tucked in, usually about the same volume or a little quieter. This is the balance of traditional third wave black metal specifically. And I just kind of like the sonic diversity here. There's a different template going on. where the two guitars aren't even. They have unique characteristics to them, which is something that in my limited exposure, I say limited, I still have had like 100 tracks under my belt, but limited exposure to black metal. um, it's an element of heavy metal that it misses or that got lost in translation or was purposefully discarded. I'm not sure entirely the history of black metal, but heavy metal has always really been about the guitar tone, right? We saw a lot of this at the earlier days of metal, a lot of this still into the 90s with metal, of crafting a guitar tone that's yours. James Hetfield has a very distinct guitar tone. Dave Mustaine has a very distinct guitar tone. What is his name? Randy. Dang, I'm blanking out. He's Black Sabbath or Ozzy? I don't remember. I know he worked with Ozzy. I just don't remember what group. Randy. Oh, also Zach Wild. Yeah, we'll just go somewhere else. It was a thing to have a signature tone. And this wasn't just for a band. I brought up Kirk. I brought up James from Metallica, but Kirk also has a signature tone, especially during his solos. You can easily tell who's soloing based on the sound of their guitar. Many metal bands which followed this format of having two guitarists typically had their own sounds on both of them, and so we created, sonic diversity within the fact that it's a very guitar-oriented and focused genre, and yet there is still a variety of voices even within a specific song. I just realized black metal sort of erases that. A lot of the black metal I've listened to that still utilizes two guitars separates them channel wise, but other than that, they sound very similar. In fact, a lot of black metal overall sounds similar. It's not just that both guitars have a similar tone, it's that a lot of the guitars in black metal have a similar tone. And I think part of that is just the hyper use of compression and distortion. Any sort of quality that you could add to the voicing, the timbre of the instrument is going to be eroded away by all this destruction that you're putting into uh, the sound wave. So yeah, maybe it's not something that was purposefully discarded, but it makes sense that it would have been lost along the way because it's not that important of an element because of the production is going to erase any of that work anyways. So this is a fascinating way to go about doing that then. We still achieve a similar concept where I can tell that there's two guitars here. They're both doing their own things and they have a separation in sound. One happens to be bigger than the other. One's a bit more compressed and feels closer to a mid-fi guitar and the other one's wider. It has a higher fidelity production to it. Yeah, I'm glad I went on that little tangent. I know that was like kind of veered off the road for a bit, but it's an interesting conclusion that I've just never thought about. How did we even get here? What was I talking about? I think the sound of it all. I guess just to recap on that, it's very compressed, it's very fuzzy, it's very distorted, um, but there is something interesting in here. I mentioned that the vocals are typically tucked into the mix in black metal, and here they're not. The vocals are quite prominent and present within the mix. This actually carries through not only to one of the guitars, which is larger than the other, but also the drums. There is very little about the drumming that feels compressed at all. It has some production work put on it, as is typical for pretty much any instrument in any genre of any song. Very rarely are we going to get raw input of anything. But it does have a little bit of compression on it to give it some bite. Otherwise, though, this feels close to just the acoustic drum kit with nothing on top of it. It's not pushed into the mix. It's not compressed down. It's not super fuzzy or anything like that. And so it gives a nice acoustic element to the track that, once again, I just never really clicked before, black metal is not too fond of acoustic instrumentation. I think that's what makes folk black metal so interesting. Timbre-wise, the sonic profile of folk black metal tends to incorporate acoustic sounds, whereas black metal traditionally is fuzz and distortion. It's the electricity, it's the overdrive, it's destruction. Very rarely do you get a clean sound of just an instrument playing. And so hearing the drums here provides a sort of clarity against the fog. Hmm. The vocals are very compressed and screamy though. Lots of distortion going on there, both physically and probably a little bit on the production side as well. They're not my cup of tea as far as vocals go. But, it's black metal. I think it does what it does well, even if I don't enjoy it. And the vocals, they match the sound of it all. um, Rhythm. Rhythm is something interesting in this track. Right from the start, from what I could hear, the guitars were doing really quick triplets against a 4/4. I'm still not 100% sure on this. I'm like 78.3 because the playing is very fast. And I couldn't tell if we were just in straight 16th notes or if we were doing triplets. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I heard some triplets there. And then we also bring up some triplets on a ride cymbal at the beginning of the bridge. Now, from this point, I was like, oh, I see this pattern. We have this 3 against 2 or 3 against 4 thing going on. I didn't hear it from here, though, and I was looking for it. So I was kind of hoping that this would be a theme in the track, and I think it just ends up being something that happened a couple of times, a coincidence more so than a pattern. But on the other side of the rhythm equation, we also have a consistently evolving rhythm. Regardless of whether they're triplets or straight notes at the beginning of the track, we still have 16th notes that dominate the verse. The chorus... Was the chorus in 16th notes too? I can't remember. I know it was chords. I just don't remember how fast we were strumming them. There were some 8th note sections in this track, though, especially in the back half when we hit the halftime section. This gave us some more elongated notes. I think we had some quarter notes in here, which is pretty slow for black metal. But as far as I remember it, there's a nice flow. We weren't ever just doing 16th notes for an extended period of time, and then we did just 8th notes on the back half. There was a nice flow to it all. The guitars sped up and slowed down, as the riffs came at them. This next riff, we're going to do the same thing we did, but, 8th notes this time around. And so the song doesn't ever feel like it hits that monotonous element that I find a lot of... I don't know what to call it, because the beginning of third wave black metal had a little bit of experimentation to it. It was still coming off of first wave and second wave, which was more of figuring out what black metal was and then experimenting with it. And then the third wave is the refinement process, when we really narrowed down the blueprint for this genre. I think there was still a little bit of experimentation going on at the beginning of this era, but as time went on, it kind of refined down into a specific idea. And this specific idea that I still see and hear in a lot of black metal created after the 90s that reflects this period. Like, I don't know if I should call it revival because it never died, but it's definitely a modern take on an older style. We just never had that moment where that style stopped existing for us to call it a revival movement. But a lot of it is hyper focused on the 16th note. It is exhausting. For me, personally, some people absolutely love that onslaught of sound. I can take it in small bursts. I think the tremolo picking and the 16th note picking works for moments. It creates a heaviness that, it's undeniable. It's a sonic assault. You are hearing a note played so many times per second. It is ridiculous. Um, but I find it fatiguing. I find it draining, and I'm not a large fan of it because it's static. It lacks a dynamic quality to it. It's a consistency. It's the same thing over and over. We don't really get that here. There is rhythmic diversity going on in this track. It isn't wildly different. We have 16th notes, we have eighth notes, and I think, again, a couple of quarter notes. Not very diverse in general, primarily focusing on two note lengths. And for the most part, when we're in one, we don't play any of the other. When we're playing eighth notes, we don't touch on the 16th. When you're on 16th, we don't touch on the eighths. But just having that little bit of diversity really amplifies my willingness to engage with the song. I don't find it mentally draining to listen to. But I think something else that benefits here is that the drums are rhythmically diverse too. There's a lot of cool patterns going on with the drums, and it isn't just blast beats and alternating bass and kick like we hear in a lot of third wave black metal that came out after the inception of this era. What I'm saying is that Emperor was doing some stuff that I think was trying to elevate this genre, to definitely push it to its limits, but remember that composition is more than one idea. And I think it's a shame that so much black metal that came out after this period that was influenced by it focuses so heavily on just this one thing that it does. Whenever I bring up how singular in focus black metal is, I tend to bring up third wave specifically because I get comments all the time. Black metal has more to do than 16th notes and blast beats. And yeah, that's true. I've heard some wild black metal, especially the post black metal stuff that's come out in the last 10 years or so. But there are a lot of bands that, for whatever reason, were strongly influenced by some of the ideas that bands like Emperor were laying down, and they weren't influenced by any of the other ideas. And so I find the diversity in Emperor refreshing, despite the fact that it came out first and isn't a refreshing version of the hyper focus that I typically associate with the genre. It's just that the genre didn't lean into this type of expansion of ideas that Emperor was laying down here. And other bands, Emperor wasn't alone. But I do think it's a shame that it's a genre that ended up becoming as one note as it is, because there's a lot of really great ideas happening in some of this earlier stuff. And that's not exclusive to black metal. Like metalcore also kind of moved in that direction, where modern metalcore it all kind of sounds the same. They all stuck with one idea, even though metalcore from years past explored it in a lot of really interesting directions. It just got honed down into a very specific sound that it doesn't fully encapsulate the genre as a whole, but is certainly defining what it is today. So let me hit some lyrics. It's black metal, which is always like a minefield. It's a landfield. There's lots of grass here. So let's see what kind of lyrics I get today with them. So this track is about some sort of sorcerer. Possibly, I'm not quite sure. They are certainly powerful in magics. They can travel through time, and they steal souls. So, that's also a thing, but we can also go into more of a supernatural angle on that rather than a magical one. Whatever you want to call this dude, he uses spells and he steals souls. And the opening stanza has the word black so many times in it that I honestly started laughing the more I read it. There's black hills that consist of black souls, souls that died 1,000 times already. There's stone walls for their black arts, and there's a cauldron of black gold. It's I don't know how much of it is a language barrier. They are a Norwegian black metal band, but also I think part of it is just the over the top element of a lot of heightened extreme metals. Death metal is also not afraid to get a bit campy with its lyrics, so it's possible that that's where this is coming from as well. Regardless, we have this character, this wizard, up in the mountains where the sun can't reach, really leading into that blackened element. Oh, it's so overdone. I love it. Anyways, travels through time and returns to the future to gather wisdom that was lost in the past. I don't know. The time stuff gets a little weird. But anyways, he sees mortals discovering what he did in the past. And so he steals their souls and puts them in a timeless prison of hate. He says, "It is delightful to feast upon the screaming souls that were destroyed in my future." It's it's definitely over the top. A lot of theatric elements to it. But it at this point mentions that he has an army of wizards that serve him with evil, though. He says, "I don't know how many wizards serve me, but my empire has no limits." He says, "I've been the ruler for an eternity, and I will continue to be the ruler." And that he has many wizards under his spell. Like that's the whole thing. He imprisoned a bunch of people, put their souls in a prison of hate, and commands them to do his evil biddings, and he's very powerful because of that. Like it doesn't. I think it's interesting because it's more of a. It's a musical number. Stick with me here. The two key types of musical types, song types in musicals, there we go, is the I am and the I want. Typically, your protagonist is going to do the I want because you're going to figure out who they are through their actions. You're going through the story with them, and so in their big hit, their big number, their big song, they're going to tell you what they want out of life. Right? This is Ariel's Part of Your World. This is uh Into the Unknown with for Elsa Frozen 2. This is Epiphany by from Sweeney Todd, right? This is the song that tells you what the protagonist wants to do with their life. But then there's the I am, which is more directive. This is the tell don't show approach because we really don't have a lot of time to spend with some characters. Usually, this gets given to our villain. They have less time in front of the audience or less screen time for a film. And so they have to tell you who they are, what makes them devious, what makes them villainous. It's really interesting when this gets subverted, but that's a conversation for a totally different video. This is a song about an evil wizard telling us who they are and why they're evil. This fits 100% into typical musical writing. It is a sinister sound paired with sinister lyrics telling us how bad this dude is, and it would be run not too long after having our I want track from our protagonist. It's a really weird parallel I'm drawing there, but that's what it is. There's no story being told here. Not really. It just tells us all the bad thing this guy's done and what he wants to do in the future. It tells us about the character more so than telling us about an event. Fascinating. Did not expect the video to go in that direction. Um, and as usual with black metal, these types of over the top, very evil lyrics tend to fit well with the sound that they're crafting. It's an antagonistic sound. Um, and the vocal style lends itself well to these evil types of characters. It all fits together. Those are my thoughts. Emperor's I Am the Black Wizards, which also is sort of a ridiculous title, but I'm growing. on all the ridiculousness going on here. I really want to watch like a musical, even funnier if it'd be Disney, but it would never be Disney, where like we get some very traditional uh styles of music that you would expect in a musical for like our main characters and stuff. And then it comes to the villain song and it is straight up black metal and he's just screeching at the top of his lungs. And then it like returns back to all the usual stuff. Um Very romantic style music and then black metal and back to the romantic classical stuff. I think that'd be hilarious. I don't know if I said this yet. Oh yeah, those are my thoughts on this track. Let me know yours though, down in the comments. Give me your thoughts, perspectives, opinions on this. Let me know if you think I'm wrong about any of this or want to expand on some of the ideas I've talked about. Above that, if you could, go into the description box. There's a link in there for a Linktree. It'll take you to this menu here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. We do have a special, no, we don't have a special section next. We have a sounds from my inbox. We're going to check out 4 songs from some smaller artists and kind of do a little bit of promotion for them and some feedback as well. You know, I always have to provide a little bit of analysis. Most of the songs are short though. Usually that video runs an hour. I think this one's going to be closer to 40 minutes. Anyways, if that doesn't interest you though, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC, as usual. We're going to check out some more of y'all's favorite riffs. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.